Hi everyone, and welcome to the reading of it is called Rape, a South African Nightmare by Pumla Gqola. And Pumla is an absolutely brilliant human being. If you can find her on the socials, please do. Just going to do a little bit more admin. Just tag the everybody in Discord. Alrighty. Welcome in, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. Today has been a very, very busy and difficult day. So please do forgive my my tardiness and how slow I have been in general over the past few days. Also, the state of the world is not exactly pleasant. Okay. We're starting chapter 1, A Recurring Nightmare. Rape is not a South African invention, nor is it distasteful sex. It is sexualized violence, a global phenomenon that exists across vast periods in human history. Rape has survived as long as it has because it works to keep patriarchy intact. And that is the fact that we need to remember. It is a power. It's a power play. It's an exertion of power. And remember, you can put comments and questions and everything in the chat. It communicates clearly who matters and who is disposable. Those who matter are not afraid of being raped because they have not been taught to fear sexual assault. They have been taught safety. Rape is the communication of patriarchal power, reigning in, enforcing submission, and punishing defiance. It is an extreme act of aggression and of power, always gendered, and enacted against the feminine. The feminine may not always be embodied in a woman's body. It may be enacted against a child of any gender, a man who is considered inappropriately masculine or emasculine, and any gender non-conforming people. Rape has also been central to the spread of white supremacy and to the way race and racism have organized the world over in the past few hundred years. And we'll get to how it is a tool of white supremacy later on. But we have to understand that rape is not about sex. It may be a sexual act, but it is not about sex itself. It has never been about sex. It has always been about power. Thank you. You're the best. You're handsome. I love you. Rape is something that we have come to expect from areas of conflict, a threat where we are adept at deciphering and a nightmare regularly reported on in our media. It appears everywhere, in political speeches about decolonization as the legitimate response against rape of the continent, land, repeatedly as something that happens to women who are out of control but need to be checked, a constitutive of die swart gevaar, or the black threat, or the black danger, directly translated. As one of the constitutive elements of society structured on slavery, as something that can be easily denied, as conspiracy, on the placard of an orange overall-clad police and prison civil rights union leader in and the South African Prisoners Organization for Human Rights, President Golden Miles Bundu, declaring that the accused in a rape case has raped in a Zapiro cartoon, where Lady Justice lies prone as the tripartite alliance get ready to rape her, as one of the many reasons why a minister with a record of gender progressive activism storms out of an exhibition by 10 black women artists. There is absolutely no reason that somebody who isn't guilty of sexual assault or rape or any form of gendered violence would walk out of an exhibition like that if they, yeah, you know. This book is called Rape, a South African Nightmare, because although rape is part of our contemporary gender talk, our constant preoccupation with it plays itself out as a series of miscommunications and missed opportunities. In other words, although we talk about it all the time, read about it, fight against it, we cannot make it go away. It's an enigma in post-apartheid South Africa, since very few admit to being rapists, yet millions are raped each year. As our newspapers cover more and more instances, we respond to them as individual acts of brutality. We must be empathetic to the violated. But having done that, we stop short of reading rape as more than just that moment, a singular event. Every time we read a rape as an isolated, enigmatic event, we move further away from curbing the alarming statistics, interrupting the patterns, and transforming gendered power. It is a systemic issue, not an individualized issue. We live in a country where somebody who was clearly guilty but was acquitted of rape became the president twice. Yeah, he was forced to resign, but it wasn't because of rape. The rape case. Hi, Taro. Good to see you. He was forced to resign because he was embezzling the country of billions of rands. The fact that he became president twice, despite the fact that all evidence pointed to that he actually did rape Kwezi, that to me is a culture of gendered violence being okay in a country that never had true freedom. And so the nightmare recurs with largely similar responses replayed. By looking at different aspects of rape and rape talk in South Africa across epochs, I make the assertion that rape is not a moment but a language, and in the pages that follow I untangled and deciphered the knots and codes of this language to surface its structure, underline its histories, understand its rules, pore over the syntax, page through its dictionaries, vocabularies, and what it communicates. It's difficult. it's difficult to untangle when so many people are in so many ways attached to the culture that perpetuates rape. As if rape is one of those unfortunate byproducts of keeping patriarchy intact. Oh, and here's the cat. No, that's my tea. Please leave it alone. Thank you. My PhD was supposed to be on how mainstream media represents gendered violence, and specifically gendered colonial violence. He's a wonderful kitty. And I'm really sad that I never got to do this PhD. Not because I would have had a doctorate, that's a bonus, but the study is not being completed. The study is not being completed because of the fascism of the US government, who never holds sexual predators accountable for all of the things they do. And it is in the language of how we speak about rape. The language that has become so normalized. I am indebted to a substantial body of writing on rape as I do so, revisiting some of these arguments made about rape, asking questions about why it often works in ways that seems counterintuitive. I'm not interested in writing the Bible on rape, nor in merely distilling here what the patterns are in research. I limit the public discussions I analyze to South African ones, not because I think there's nothing to be learned elsewhere or because South Africa is exceptional, but to probe specific relationships to rape, specific histories, surface our blind spots, and to better reflect on possible ways out of this quagmire. This is a political project. I am invested in trying to figure out how we can change collective approaches to rape from different spaces and how to broaden transformative praxis beyond the small radical healing and generative spaces of organizations opposed to gendered violence. And yes, we have to talk about those things. We have to absolutely understand how healing spaces can be so necessary for survivors. But we cannot deny that we have to look at the big picture. The personal and political motivation for this book comes from the same place as the sense of unfairness my friends and I felt when we were young, when girls were humiliated, sexually harassed, slut-shamed, molested. The same place that motivated my training and volunteer work as a rape crisis counselor 2 decades ago, and the same place that prompted my membership of the 1 in 9 campaign, an organization that takes a multi-layered approach to feminist anti-rape work. When I did the bulk of my work at Rape Crisis Observatory in Khayelitsha, I was also writing a master's thesis on the first 5 years of the Staff Rider magazine. I had been ill-prepared for the space that raped fictional black women characters occupied in these short stories. And I had known that I may have chosen an entirely different research project. I've written in that thesis and elsewhere about how to make sense of the fact that almost a third of the stories published in this literary magazine contained a black woman character raped by a white man. I tried to understand the relationship between, on one hand, the fact that rape was clearly violence and these women characters could not escape in the hands of brutal white men, and the fact that it was only those black women characters who defied their society's prescription on appropriate feminine behavior that were raped in these stories, on the other. The furthering of the Jezebel myth. It was clear that rape was being written as a punishment for bad behavior. Also clear that the rape of black women by white men was a constant preoccupation for these writers. For 2 years, I pored over and tried to make sense of this preoccupation with rape in this magazine. It was intellectual work, but was also emotionally distressing. Reading and analyzing. I wrote mostly in the early mornings and late at night. During the day, I went to my paid and volunteer works. In the morning, I went to my part-time tutoring jobs and at the English department and academic development program at UCT, University of Cape Town, as well as an academic development unit in what was then Cape Technicon, all work that brought me enormous joy. For a few hours a week, I counseled rape survivors at Rape Crisis. I also did that. That's where I got my start. Difficult work. I nonetheless found counseling enormously rewarding and healing because sometimes a girl or a woman moved through trauma to hope, and also because many of the women who were similarly volunteering were the most remarkable people I had ever met. Their courage, dedication, and support was another affirmation of feminist community, not my first, but one that changed me, nonetheless. And yes, my time at Rape Crisis changed me for the better, made me a better person. Sometimes the most thankless work is the most rewarding. At the same time, there was not much I was able to do when a friend of mine was abducted and gang raped. When she reported the crime, refused any sort of counseling, and had the successfully collected evidence of her rapist used against her in court. I remember this case. We were starting to be very aware of HIV when she realized that they were going to rape her, pleaded with them at least to use a condom. In the end, although her body bore the kind of evidence of physical and sexual attack that our society expects to see in a typical rape case, she led the police officers to the site of her rape where the condoms were collected in evidence, and she had provided enough information to get them arrested. Various legal justice officials pointed out that the fact that the men had used condoms on her prompting meant she had consented. Her boyfriend begged me every day to convince her to go to counseling, and my then boyfriend tried hard to understand what I meant when I said it was not right to pressure her into anything. I recognized their frustration, but knew she had needed to feel strong, not weak, and I believed her when she said to me she didn't need help. In Teaching My Mother How to Give Birth, Kenyan-born Somali poet Washan Shire reminds us that sometimes the wound is by the healer. Even with the best intentions, and the rape crisis training had affirmed a principle I had learned quite early on in my feminism, that each woman's process is different, and forcing solutions is not empowering. It was at about this time, as I wrote about rape for my thesis, counseled my clients, and battled with how to support my most recent rape survivor friend, that I was discovering and falling in love with Miriam Tlali. I thought I was drawn to her because she was a black feminist who had written consistently throughout the 80s, columns, essays, interviews with other women writers, trying to make sense of the relationships between black women and writing novels and short stories. I loved that when she wrote about rape, she did so differently from her peers, with gentleness and empathy for the women characters, told from their perspectives. As a reader, I was delighted by the dialogue she wrote into her characters' mouths. In the story Devil at Dead End from her 1989 collection of short stories, Footprints in the Quag, Miriam Tlali's unnamed girl narrator escapes rape by outsmarting the lecherous white clerk who sneaks her into a carriage when she is alone and asleep by telling him that she is afflicted with a venereal sickness, using the word Gqola. Tlali's narrator notices the impact of that word was quick, merciless, shocking, and immediately disarming. Like when in a dark alley you suddenly grope into a dead end. She stood still, listening to the sound of receding breath. She reached below the bunk above and lowered the dim switch. She watched the recoiling devilish figure and drew a sigh of relief. Unable to physically resist her assailant, this young woman outsmarts him by doing with her mind what her body has failed to do. In another story that appears earlier in the collection, Vaudois, women unsuccessfully tried to escape groping and rape in congested train conditions and build a community as one of ways to defend themselves. Unlike the stories I was writing about in my thesis, Tlali's girls and women understand, analyze, and develop ways to deal with the threats, fear, and experience, collectively and individually. They believe, help, and protect one another. They are not just bodies and metaphors, not faces and vaginas. Their bodies are not battlegrounds. If any of you are listening, you don't have to comment or anything. But if your body has ever felt like a crime scene, I get it. And I'm with you. Instead, she repeatedly made different choices for her characters, whether they feared, escaped, or survived rape. They were never deviant outsiders, written as though they deserved what happened to them because of their foolishness or transgressions. They belonged to a community of women who protect and fight alongside one another. And I think that's what a lot of us didn't have as survivors. We didn't have community. Each reading of Tlali offers the possibility that something might be illuminated differently, a reminder that some solutions require taking the imagination seriously. Writing and imagining is doing. It is action and politically consequential, not retreat. Tanzanian literary scholar Susan Andrade insists that we should think about African feminist work in terms of what is generated by rioting women and writing women, not as oppositional but complementary. For Andrade, rioting and writing women are political, practical, imaginative, and both are the birthplaces of intellectual abstraction. Following Andrade, I'd like to think that sometimes writing women are rioting women. I like that. A few years ago, when I first encountered this essay, it aptly captured the substantial thinking, strategizing, and analysis that I had encountered in activist spaces, and significantly challenged the dominant academic frames that pretended that abstraction happened among those located in institutional spaces, designated intellectual, where activist spaces exhibited only practice. I think many of us who came to feminism before we entered university research careers know this, that some of the most transformative, thought-provoking abstraction is taught in activist communities, not in classrooms. In the 1 in 9 campaign, for example, the textures of thinking, reflection, and debate and discussion that go into every campaign of direct action remind me of this constantly. In this context of writing this book, this is the context of me writing this book. From this context, I want to ask the questions about society that I'm part of and its relationship to rape. Writing is also thinking and rethinking some of these questions. existing alongside conversations with other feminists in community and individually. If South Africans generally are opposed to rape, then why does it continue to be such a huge part of our everyday lives, with so few interventions? Why is rape so often met with disbelief, second-guessing, and invitations to keep it under wraps? Why are some rapes perceived as more shocking and devastating than others? What does it mean to invite survivors to break the silence, report and lay charges against rapists when successful prosecution rates are so low? After one of my op-eds on Jacob Zuma's rape trial had been published by a national paper in 2006, an old friend called me to express concern that I might be read as not just a feminist but also a survivor. For my friend, although the former was perfectly acceptable because it was deliberate, a political stance, the latter was worrisome because, as he argued, it might delegitimize and stigmatize me. I pointed out to him there's something wrong with the society that stigmatizes survivors and dissuades others from supporting them publicly and privately rather than shaming perpetrators. And yes, it really is something wrong with our society. It was equally perverse that survivors could be dissuaded from speaking in support of one another against rape culture. I did not understand then what it meant to be a feminist who bit her tongue on rape, and I still don't. The question that has replayed on loop since I received that phone call, however, is how being a survivor could disqualify a person from speaking against rape. The suggestion seemed counterintuitive, as my friend stated concern. This friend was the kind of man who actively worked for greater women's representation on various leadership structures in his movement, someone who had often been the sole man repeatedly arguing for the recognition of sexual harassment as violence in his organization, and that unfashionable person who not only intervened when a man beat his girlfriend at a party, but also noticed and broke a neighbor's door down in order to assist the woman screaming in pain inside. He was the kind of man women consider an ally. He had never asked me whether I was in fact a rape survivor, and he readily assumed that if I was, he would have known. I asked him how a non-survivor's feminist opposition to rape retained legitimacy when a feminist who was also a rape survivor would be disqualified. My ambivalence about this conversation notwithstanding, it illustrates something about many people's response to rape. When I asked him whether he believed Kwezi, he responded without hesitation that he did. When I asked him whether he thought she deserved support, he responded similarly. When it struck me as counterintuitive about my friend's concern was how those with experience were least qualified to speak against it. In most other contexts, intimate familiarity with the subject and experience raises you above those with less direct contact. But we live in a global culture that reminds us that experience is the best teacher, where having gone through something not only makes you worth listening to, but also builds careers. Bestsellers are brimming with books penned by authors who have bounced back from bankruptcy to attain affluence. Offering advice on how to acquire wealth, we listen attentively to experts who have studied phenomena as they explain to us how things work and help us make sense of what is in front of us. Everywhere I looked, people who knew what they were talking about were celebrated. We think of first-hand accounts as more reliable than second-hand ones, make witnesses indispensable in fact-finding missions and court processes alike, but none of this applies to the testimony of those who have survived rape. My friend was right. The dominant script inverts the usual expectations. When a survivor speaks of her own rape, she is only believable under those very narrow circumstances. When she speaks about rape inflicted on another, she is assumed unreliable because she is too emotionally invested, biased, too quick to believe that rape is widespread. It is not empathy, recognition, or knowledge that is assumed. It is a form of paranoia. If the rape survivor's own rape was disbelieved, speaking in solidarity with another is also just as dismissed. And I can attest to that. Jane Bennett's research shows how believability of rape survivors depend on how closely her rape resembles society's idea of what rape looks like, who does it, and who can be raped, when and how. In other words, every time a woman says she has been raped, whether we believe her or not depends on what we believe about what it looks like. The closer her story is to our preconceived ideas, the more likely we are to believe that she is telling the truth. When feminists insist, as we must, that rape is violence and not sex, this information is filtered through lenses that cast violence in physical ways only. Commonsensical understandings of violence often assume it will leave physical imprints on the body, bruises, blood, a broken bone. A visibly injured or broken body provides proof of coercion, allowing the listener to turn away from a story told by the survivor to the body of the survivor. The story told by a woman needs a body of evidence, and it is not an interest of the pain of the rape, but burden of proof placed on the survivor or victim. Jane Bennett speaks about what it means to live within and across failures of language, because rape is not only violence enacted on and against the body with an external weapon that leaves the kind of proof often expected. Sometimes rape leaves bruises on skin, cuts, tears. Sometimes it just leaves invisible scars only. The body that seems whole can work against the experience of violation narrated by the violated woman. She explains that women's stories of rape are believed or doubted based on this relationship between plausibility and credibility. And this is true inside and outside the courtroom. When a rape closely resembles what the hearer expects a rape to look like, the survivor's tale is plausible. Plausibility is about and dependent on the hearer and what the hearer deems possible, not about the specific person speaking. Bennett writes, "The plausibility of a story in itself is a function of the hearer's readiness to make sense of its organization at multiple levels. The plausibility of narrative relies on the symbolic relation of text, organization or schemas, and cultural assumptions about the way the world works." In other words, plausibility depends on a range of things of which are dependent on the audience of the narrated events. The listener or reader has to, firstly, be open to believing and understanding what is presented. Secondly, find that different events and aspects of what is being told individually make sense. Thirdly, be convinced of the connections between said events or aspects of the narrated rape. And finally, everything together has to be possible in how the listener or reader thinks the world works. A rape story is plausible only when all four requirements are consistent. And this is true. I need to take a little bit of a breather. So how was everybody? Are you all doing well? I found the most brilliant graphic designer to design my entire what's it? What's it called? Oh, my logo and everything. And when the car was stolen, I was like, no, I can no longer afford this. So, yeah. I hope you all are doing well, because it has not been a great time. But I need to take a little bit of a breather. And I have a song in my head. Like, I have. Yeah. Sorry, I was just getting it all sorted out. Um, I just need to take a bit of a breather because this is tough. Please go to any of these links. I'm just taking a quick breather. Yeah, so I'll be back in a few minutes. Just taking a bit of a breather. The best bet. Yeah.
Because they know your story, right?
They do.
So then why would they invite you? I suppose it's an open invite, I guess.
It is an open invite. Meg, it's in the link in my bio on my main account. Okay, and we're back. When a teacher listens to a crying student narrate her rape, the latter story plausibility depends on the teacher believing that the torn skirt, dirty t-shirt, an unruly soiled hair, and the cut lip of the student in front of her are valid signs of the student's struggle and violation. The student's body looks like she has been attacked. The teacher has to believe each of the events are logical, that the sequence makes sense, and the student's way of telling them is logical. The correlation between what the teacher sees and hears is seamless. The teacher also has to believe that in the world, girls are sometimes pulled into bushes by boys, that boys form from a competing school are thugs, and that when girls are in pain, they cry. The student's story is coherent in itself. Her body backs up what she says, but what she tells her teacher is possible in the world. This plausibility is disrupted if any of these elements are missing. Bennett reminds us that when survivors present a story that meets expectations of the audience, such plausibility often increases the likelihood of a guilty verdict in court cases. In other words, what Bennett is saying here is that inside and outside the courts, across different countries, what is accepted as plausible is that which confirms preconceived ideas about what rape is, who rapes, then when, who gets raped, and how. Therefore, when we live in societies that hold on to the view that those likely to rape look and sound a certain way, which is clearly defined as very different from those who can be raped look, we may find specific narration of rape plausible. Plausibility relies on the construction of rapist potential, what Bennett calls a strongly about to be rapist, and the consistency of the combined picture of who says she was raped and her narrative, or momentary steadiness. So when people say things like, oh, he couldn't have done that, when it came to somebody like Brock Turner, their preconceived notion is that a Stanford student cannot be a rapist, that a man from a wealthy family could not be a rapist, that somebody who is a scholarship swimmer could not be a rapist. In addition to plausibility, credibility is required. Plausibility is about the listener, whereas credibility is about the person telling the story. Credibility depends how believable the speaker is, and to be believable, the speaker has to fall into a category that is seen as possible to rape, has to be someone who can be raped. And not all people are seen as being possible to rape. Sex workers, wives, slave women, and men are all categories of people that have at different stages been placed in the category of impossible to rape or unrapeable. This does not mean that nobody raped them. It means that when they were sexually violated, it was not recognized as such, legally and socially. People who are placed in the category of impossible to rape are routinely disbelieved when they report. Because societal attitudes to rape continue to frame it as a kind of inappropriate form of sex, sex workers and prostitutes have had a hard time convincing people that they have been raped, because sex workers belong to a group marked as unrapeable. This is because of what they do for a living and patriarchal attitudes towards women who have sex. In other words, many people assume that sex workers or prostitutes need to have insatiable appetites for sexual intercourse in order to work daily, because women's sexual appetites are already always policed. This perceived desire or capacity for abundant sex is seen as deviant. The argument then often follows that if a sexually deviant person, they are always ready to have sex and therefore cannot say no. They are impossible to rape in this argument because they are always willing. There are many problems with this line of argument, and all of them require conflation and avoidance to build a seemingly logical argument. In the minds of many, prostitution is about excessive deviant sex, not a paid service. And this comes with its own a set of illogical shit. Consequently, patriarchal ideas about women who have uncontained sex spill over into readings of women sex workers. This disapproval of women who have deviant sex also includes the difficult and sometimes coercive routes to prostitution. Failure to see sex work as work means that it is denied the basic assumptions that we all accord to other paid services, choices over whom to transact with, thereby conflating sex for money and pleasure and rape. Sex workers are deemed impossible to rape because they are constructed as always willing to have sex with anybody. They cannot say no. Furthermore, because they are deviant and criminalized, they are not reliable witnesses. In many societies in the world, religion and law insist that a man is entitled to sex with his wife, and even when this is forced, it cannot be rape. This entitlement, often called conjugal rights, is loaded with assumptions about women's sexual appetites, control of their own bodies, and the proper place for heterosexual sex. Just as women with sexual appetites that do not conform to ideal patriarchal femininity are policed and sometimes stigmatized, women who will not have sex in marriage are faulted. If men are entitled to conjugal rights, then women owe their husbands sex. Fortunately, South African law recognizes marital rape, but it is not free from the difficulties that haunt all other categories. Often, women and femmes are told, just go back to your husbands. So many women are told that they belong to their husbands. And I have seen it happen. Credibility is already in question when a sex worker or a wife reports rape. Credibility also relies heavily on the believability of who she says raped her. The accused has to fall into a category of potential rapist, strangers, poor men, black men, socially inept men, all seen as potential rapists. Popular, powerful, successful men are often excluded from the category of potential rapist. This is why when women accuse powerful, famous, and popular men of rape, so many people find this unbelievable, even if they have no personal relationship with either accused or the woman laying the charge. This was certainly the case with the Jacob Zuma trial, since people who admired Zuma often could not reconcile the idea of the political figure they had in their heads with what Kwesi was accusing him of. Before this, the same was evident in the public responses to Makhaya Ntini, and after to Zwelinzima Vavi. When South African cricketer Makhaya Ntini was convicted of raping a 22-year-old Nomangezi Motokazi and later freed on appeal, she was accused of being part of a plot to bring him down. He was powerful, at the top of his cricketing game, and a hero, and therefore assumed to have access to any number of women. She was his opposite, a student who worked as a domestic worker. In a world where various idioms declared that more affluent the man, the higher his capacity to attract women, her narrative did not make sense. Women like her are supposed to find men like him irresistible, right? In The Agony of a Hero's Victim, her interview published in the City Press, where she wanted to be named and photographed, hence my decision to name her here, Ms. Matokazi demonstrated keen awareness of what she determined, whether strangers believed her or not, when she said, "I want those who did not believe me to hear my whole story. My story is that Ntini raped me. Some people think I was sent by Boers to accuse Ntini of rape so he could be left out of the cricket team, but this is not true. I don't want any of his money. All I want is for justice to be done and for him to be sent to jail for what he did to me. I have lost my job and I am no longer studying. My mother is on a farm in Dutwa with no one to support her. The way things are going, with things getting lost, the investigators lost her notebooks, it looks like Ntini will win the case, and there's nothing I can do. I don't trust men any longer. One can never tell me what their intentions are. I trusted Ntini, and look what he did. I never thought he would do this." Contrary to the accusations that she has manufactured a rape tale for money, Matokazi declares her disinterest in his money. She has not been paid by any others for her testimony. Rather than enrichment, her life has been disrupted. She is interested only in a form of justice as acknowledgement of the harm inflicted upon her. Ntini is an overachiever, arguably one of South Africa's greatest cricketers. He is easy to admire and often appears charming in interviews. In the same interview, Matokazi speaks about how he would often be seen playing cricket with children, has always been nice, and so she was not taken aback when he offered to drive her to the shops in the rain. It was an act of kindness that was consistent with her experience of him. A fast bowler extraordinaire. Ntini, a black cricketer in a highly racialized South African sports scene, was one of the pioneers who exceeded our expectations. He is the young man we were rooting for, who was making us proud, but also a young man we had grown protective over because of the usual racist narrative that trivializes black achievement. It was therefore easy for many to immediately jump to his defense and to accuse Matokazi of being for sale. It was equally easy for racists who wanted Ntini left out of the cricket team because they are opposed to transformation in South African sport to believe Ntini capable of rape. Interestingly, although these two positions seem at odds, they also have something significant in common. Neither one is interested in Matokazi's experience. It was all about him. Her charge simply confirms pre-existing stances. For the pro-Ntini camp, her testimony offers another barrier for him to be supported, one that he has to overcome. For the racist, it confirms pre-existing stereotypes of black men's bestiality, which can be brought out to delegitimize his sporting prowess. Both these narratives are directly confronted in her interview. Bennett shows that while what makes a story plausible often relies on stereotypes about the accused rapist, stereotypes about the group in which the survivors belong often works against her believability or credibility. Because people continue to think about rape as inappropriate sex, and because of the examples above, rather than as violence, powerful, popular men are not potential rapists because they have a large pool of willing, available, obligation-free sex. Gender talk is often peppered with assertions that members of this group do not need to rape. They do not need to force anybody to have sex with them, and when they have so many other options. For racists, the stereotype of the black man as rapist makes Matokazi's story plausible. Yet there's another way to understand the relationship of powerful men to rape. If all men already possess patriarchal power, and can therefore choose to rape, then powerful men assume the positions of supermen. Supermen's unfettered access to many anonymous women and sexual partners can enhance the sense of entitlement to women's bodies, and therefore resorting to violence to forcibly access it. Supermen know that many will come to their defense, against any such allegations, and their supporters will compare the woman's social standing with the man's, and finding her wanting, will ask, if he can have anyone he likes, why would he force you of all people? It is an impossible question to answer. Nobody wins against a hero. Indeed, even in cases where various women emerge to accuse the same popular man, many will prefer to pontificate over possible conspiracies than pay attention to the mounting evidence. Credibility then continues to be difficult for rape complainants. Conventional gender talk seeks to either hold a survivor responsible for her own rape or requires that she can tell a story and show her total innocence through it. Innocence is almost impossible to prove, especially for adults. To be innocent, she needs to not be an adult woman. Bennett argues when a woman narrating her rape has to create her own social credibility in ways that are oxymoronic, presenting a story that harmonizes with notions of the typical rape in her society, demonstrating levels of steadiness in her narrative that are almost impossible to attain. Preg's Govender wrote in 2006, "In South Africa, a woman who has sex is a whore, a hoer, a prostitute, who likewise cannot be raped. They are objects owned by men, whose bodies do not belong to them." Kwezi is 31 years old. At 31, very few except nuns, yogis, celibate since childhood, or the Virgin Mary can claim to have no sexual history. The message being conveyed is that if any woman or child decides to lay a charge of rape, this is how she will be crucified. Preg's Govender is a wonderful, wonderful teacher and mentor that I have been very lucky to have had. Govender is not writing about Matokazi here, although what she says is equally relevant. Women's sexual histories and general life experiences render them hard to believe because they are not innocent. At the same time that both Matokazi and Kwezi testified, sexual history was permitted as part of the court proceedings. As Govender shows, contrary to popular opinion, reporting rape and going through the criminal justice system channels places women at further risk, rather than promising relief. Like Bennett, Govender shows the impossibility of the expectations placed on those who report rape. Any sexual history complicates and at times nullifies her story. Referring specifically to the legal treatment of women who report, Navi Pillay, she was part of the UN, cautions, in the eyes of the law, a woman is both Eve and Eva. Pure, fragile female, she must be specially protected, and as a seductive sex object from whom men must be protected, like sirens. In both cases, women are the victims, thereby driving home the manner in which the attitudes outlined in this chapter are not merely societal, but those that resonate with legal treatment of rape complainants as well. I believe an end to rape is both possible and worth fighting for. Given the range of ways in which the violation and interpretation work in counterintuitive ways, as various chapters show, I suspect that we need to be especially imaginative to decrease the instances of rape, to change how we think rape works, and to make it harder for people to rape. And that is the chapter. Any questions? As always, if you have any questions, please, you can DM me, or you can ask me on TikTok, or you can join my Discord. All of the links are in my link tree, which you can find on my OG TikTok account. Yeah, Taro, the truth is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. And when the truth is uncomfortable and we confront it, that's when we learn the most. As usual, I do these readings for free. So if you can subscribe to my Patreon. That would be incredibly helpful. Patreon is in my link tree as well. And if you can't subscribe for $5 a month, then please, my virtual tip jar is there as well. My name everywhere is either The Unscripted Revolution or Nikki Starfish, Niki Starfish. And yeah, I also have some other kinds of links if you're interested in that kind of stuff. And I shall see y'all next week Tuesday, because we are done for the readings for the week. Tuesday is going to be a bit of a tired day because the day before is Diwali. If you are celebrating Diwali, Shubh Diwali to you, and I shall see y'all then. Yes, absolutely, Taro. I shall see you soon. Remember, drink water, eat something, take your meds, smash the motherfucking patriarchy, eat all the white men, and if you don't eat meat, compost them. And remember to be kind, especially to yourselves, because everybody deserves kindness, including you. Thanks for hanging out with me.